On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC Podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 75, created on April 21st, 2024. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota. Neil is actually in Green Bay today. And our friend Peter in London. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm having a Bloody Maria.
I am in Wisconsin, and so I'm having a Wisconsin beer. It is a Carbon 4 from Madison. It is the Fantasy Factory, because that's most of what our discussion is today.
Hi, gentlemen. Good afternoon. Good morning. I'm sitting here with a mixture, a decaffeinated coffee and some aloe vera drink, which is very tasty, but I'm not sure about the mix of the two.
And full disclosure, it is a Sunday morning, so I'm with Jeff, hair of the dog that bit me right here, and another Bloody Maria as well.
We're being kind of cheap, Peter, for a change by not keeping up in the middle of the night. So,
yes, exactly. Yeah, this is a reasonable time for Peter here. All right, you can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat. And just the audio is now available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. Hey, what are we talking about today? It's the NFL draft, and we have our draft expert, Peter, with us. We're going to go over first round and maybe overall draft selections, the effect of the free agency on the draft. And yes, Neil, Jeff, and I are going to be making our big picks for the NFL draft this year. And you know what? The draft is coming to Green Bay next year. We will talk about that. But first, Peter, this is your third time on the GBC podcast. This actually makes you an honorary member of the GBC. How do you feel about that?
It's great. Thank you so much for inviting me back. I love talking to you guys, love talking about the Packers, love talking about the draft. So it's really good to be here. Thank you.
You know, and we appreciate the work that you do. So I want to give you some time to just talk about what you do. You put out a draft guide. It is available online. It is free to all the fans. Where do we find it? What's in it?
As you say, it's free to download as a PDF. It's on the UK Packers website, which is ukpackers.co.uk. There's a nice link to the 2024 draft there, and you can just go on there and download it as a PDF. 300 plus pages, obviously around this year's draft, a big board, some profiles of players, a little bit of Packers draft history, a little bit of looking back at the draft picks from last year, and some various bits and pieces. And it is a labor of love that takes a lot more than 1 year to do.
Let's start there with last year. We had you on last year. We briefly talked about Lucas Van Ness. Look at what you put together last year, not just the first round, but overall. How would you rate your success in what you thought was going to happen and what did actually happen?
It wasn't too bad overall. I mean, I was actually, comparing where the guys fell as to where we had them on our big board, and that's not necessarily the best measure of success. But Lucas Van Ness, by some fluke, was 13th on our draft board last year, and he went at 13. I think that Luke Musgrave was 45 on our board, and he went at 42, or the other way around. And Colby Wooden was like 116, and he went at 117, or the other way around. So. Yeah, from that perspective, it was pretty good. I think the thing that, I don't know whether it surprised us on draft night or not, I mean, was Lucas Van Ness. We absolutely understood the pick. A young, speedy, fast, pass rusher type. You can never have enough of those edge guys. I guess personally, I'd so zeroed in and so hoped that they were going to pick Jackson Smith in Jigba. And we talked about that last year. Now, as it turned out, that Packers wide receiver core didn't need him, because what a fantastic group that is turning into. So I think Goody proved that he knew more than all of us.
I think one of the things that was most impressive about the draft guide was all of us were reading it as the Packers were making all of their picks, and just an incredible resource actually as the draft is going on and in your post-draft analysis. And we were really excited about the players last year because of what you had written in the draft guide, and those predictions about what the players were going to do, what their strengths were, ended up pretty much being on the mark as far as how those players performed and how this was such a good draft for us last year.
Thank you. I mean, it is just about the time, and sometimes we get close, and sometimes we're way off. But we do our best, and it is about putting that time in, and it's mostly, as I say, it's a labor of love, but it's a lot of fun, because it definitely keeps obviously my interest going, and it generates a lot of discussion. So yeah, I enjoy it a lot. And like I say, I've already 2025 draft guide is well on its way. I've already started a little bit about 2026. Would you believe? So, it's almost, each one of them now is almost 1,000-day project, right? So it's kind of, but it's not, obviously 1,000 complete days, but it from when it first starts to when that particular draft is, it's that kind of time period. It keeps me out of trouble.
Definitely credit to Brian Gutekunst as well. Like you said, not only the last year draft, but the last two drafts. This Packer team proved that they could play with the youngest team in the league, and nearly every pick over the last 2 years for Gutekunst has been perfect. And you even mentioned it with this year, the receivers. Did they need a first-round draft pick receiver? No. But there are a couple of guys, Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks in particular, where now you get the hindsight is 2020 people that are going out there and saying, hey, where should these guys have gone? And those are two guys that people are saying could have or should have been first-round picks just based on the way that they played this year. When you were putting your guide together over the last few years, did either of those names jump out at you, or other than Jackson Smith and Jigba, who jumped out at you later round maybe?
Yeah, I mean, Romeo Doubs did a couple of years back, and Dontavian Wicks did last year, and I remember writing last year because Dontavian Wicks' college career was up and down, and when he was good, he was very good, and I think the words were something along the lines of, "Will the real Dontavian Wicks stand up?" Because the potential was definitely there. I guess what makes it really difficult, particularly at the wide receiver position, when about 30 of those guys are going to get drafted, you can make a case for quite a number of those guys going to your team. So you never quite know, particularly in the middle rounds, you never quite know which of those guys is going to end up with your team. I liked Jaron Reed as well. Not as much as the Packers did. I had him a little bit further down my board, and I think that he was the one that probably surprised most in terms of where he went in the draft. Mm-hmm. But again, an excellent rookie season, and has shown that super flexibility, adaptability that he's got. And I love the fact in this wide receiver group that they're all growing up together along with the young quarterback. That doesn't preclude, and I know we'll probably get to this, that doesn't preclude that the Packers may sneakily take a wide receiver this time around, because their fear in 2 or 3 years' time is that all of these guys hit free agency together. Yeah. So keep retooling if you can.
Yeah, wouldn't that be the shit if this is the year that they finally take a wide receiver in the first round? But you're right, what you just said, though. Drafting is not necessarily for the immediate need. Yeah. The draft is typically looking 3 and maybe even 4 years down the road, but it's not looking where you are now. It's looking, okay, with the guys you have now, are they going to grow, and are you going to be able to afford to keep them? Yeah. And if you can't, are you backfilling now? And that's definitely a good point with the way that this team has been building, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I wanted to touch base because Neil likes the beefy big boys on the line. In your picks there, talking about Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden. You mentioned Wooden earlier. Where did you have those guys lined up in your grand scheme of things last year?
Yeah, so Brooks around round 5. He did look like a Packer, a kind of third-day Packer player. So he was on my watch list because I just liked him, and even though his relative athletic score, his RAS score, wasn't that great, he just looked like a guy that would fit the Packers rotation. So I really liked Brooks. Wooden, I was torn about, and I was torn about Wooden because he kind of fitted between 2 positions. I wasn't, because of his size, I wasn't sure whether he was a 3-4 defensive end or a 3-4 outside linebacker. His size kind of fitted him in between those 2. So he was the one that was slightly surprising to me, that he went to a 3-4 team. But the Packers clearly liked him, and I'm not sure going forwards whether he stays inside as a 4-3 defensive tackle or becomes an edge guy, and that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, and that could be a topic for a whole different podcast, is taking a look at where this 4-3 defense is going to take us down the road. Going back to your watch list from last year, anybody on that watch list that didn't end up in Green Bay that you really liked, but then you watched and you looked at what they did? Maybe pick one guy that you watched what they did with their team and you said, yep, I knew this guy was going to be there. and maybe another guy you said, oh, I thought he was going to be good, but he kind of busted this year?
Yeah, it's difficult to remember back to that watch list of the guys that the Packers didn't pick. So that's a bit of a struggle to answer. I mean, the guy that was top of all of my lists was Jackson Smith and Jigba, as we've already said. That's actually turned out well for the Packers, as we've already said. I've got to be honest with you, off the top of my head, I can't think of a guy. I should probably go back and look at last year's watch list to see who was on there, because I'm sure there'll be a few that you think, yeah, he was really good.
All right, fair enough.
One of the things that I find great about this list is when you hear about the top players, right? The top QBs and whatever, they get a lot of airtime on draft shows and such. It's sort of the middle round guys where when they're picking, like, who's this dude, right? And go right to your guide, and there's generally a ton of information on that. You know, not only whether they went to school, your projection, but then also, you know, the bio or whatever. It's so thorough, it's so thought out, and it's just it's a great introduction to that player, whomever gets drafted, but especially for the Packers. Like, okay, what makes this guy tick? And when you put when there's little comments in there about if they do in fact go to the Packers and why this is a good fit, I think that's what I just think is fantastic about this guide.
Well, with that, let's talk about this year's guide. Peter, you've put all the work in. Let's start from at the top. Who are some of the top guys that you know just aren't going to fall to Green Bay? We're not going to get them at 25. Someone that you're like, oh, this would be awesome, but he's just going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no surprise to that, you know, quarterbacks are almost certainly going 1, 2, 3, perhaps 1, 2, 3, 4, which would be the first time ever. Then you've got the group of the 3 wide receivers, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. They're going in the top 10. And this is actually good for the Packers because it means other position groups are starting to fall down the board. But I would not be surprised that the first 7 picks are 4 quarterbacks and three wide receivers. And I think that there's a chance that we may get no defensive players in the top 10, which again I believe would be a first. I think the other group that's really deep is the offensive line. So both offensive tackle and interior offensive line, which is unusually deep. And it wouldn't surprise me to see 5, 6, 7 potentially offensive tackles go in the first round, which again would be a record. Now for the Packers, I think that helps because it's a position of, I'm not going to say immediate need, but absolutely that would be a position that you'd be looking for the Packers to strengthen. Turn it in reverse. Some of the groups that are not quite as strong, tight end, probably only one guy goes in the first round. Packers in a great position at tight end, which I'm not going to say is surprising, but a year ago, that's a position we would have been worrying about, but, you know, did really well at tight end in the draft last year. And safety is a position where there's, other than one guy, Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, who is a corner projected to be a safety by some, including me. Other than him, the group of safeties is strongest around the end of round 2 and round 3. So nobody else in that kind of first round area. Corners, I think it's a pretty typical corner class without somebody right at the top of the group, but there's 3 or 4 kind of first round type guys. So yeah, and that's kind of where we are. And I'm kind of hopeful from a Packers perspective that because they're positions of need, there's quite a little bit of depth at those positions. I think it gives, other than safety, I think it gives the Packers some flexibility as to what to do with that first pick. Stay where they are, move up, move down, we'll see.
And I agree with you there. I think the offensive line and the cornerbacks or D-back situation is probably where they're going to go first. But there's a couple of defensive linemen that look really intriguing that could jump down into Green Bay's lap. Looking specifically, Peter, at Johnny Newton in Illinois, Chop Robinson in Penn State. Are these players that you think, A, are going to be around at 25, and B, are they Packer players?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think they're both right in that 25-ish area. So guys that could go probably anywhere between 20 and 30. They're right in that area. Personally, I think that Newton's probably a better fit for the Packers than Chop Robinson. I think that Robinson, now there are people that I've spoken to who like Robinson for the Packers. Absolutely. What worries me about Robinson for the Packers is the size profile. So the Packers, again, going to this 4-3 defense, if you look at the size of those 4-3 edge guys, you know, they're 6'4", 6'5", 270 plus pounds. Chuck Robinson's not quite 6'3", 254 or 255 pounds. So it doesn't fit that size profile. Now, that's not to say that the Packers won't do that, but it doesn't immediately look like the fit.
Nothing to do with him playing at Penn State. It's just his size.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's not to say they won't go outside, you know, what they normally do. It's just that you look historically in the last few years of the edge guys that Goody's either drafted, the Rashan Gary's, the Lucas Van Nesses, or the guys that he's picked up in free agency, the Preston Smiths. It's not that kind of size. Mm-hmm. Do I think that edge is a position the Packers would be interested in? Yeah, I do. I think it just depends on how this board falls. And I think because you can have it's another one of those positions where you can never have enough of those guys, because you want 4 or 5 guys in that rotation. And B, as you mentioned earlier, John, you're looking forward a year or a couple of years, and Preston Smith's contract is going year to year, and there's going to be a year where it doesn't. And so they're going to want to look for another guy in that rotation.
So one of the things that's intriguing to me is that, you know, people have basically said, you know, offensive tackle and D-back are the Packers' biggest position of need. But I think we're going to learn a lot about the Packers' assessment of those positions by what they do in the first round, because you can look on paper and you go Walker, Jenkins, Myers, Ryan, Tom, all those guys played a lot of snaps last year. And so in theory, we don't have a need for that position. But if they have doubts about some of those players, you could absolutely see them going towards a first round pick. And same in the D-back position, Jair, Keyshawn, Xavier McKinney, Anthony Johnson Jr. and Stokes, right? The question is, do they trust Stokes coming back, for example? And if they trust that Stokes is going to come back at full speed, I think that there's less of a need and they've got more flexibility. If they're not so sure about Stokes, that becomes something that's a pretty urgent need that is best addressed in the first round rather than later rounds. I think our biggest need overall is linebacker, but that's obviously not a first round position.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think that I say this about lots of positions, but corner is one of those positions where you can never have enough guys, and B, you're absolutely right. The Eric Stokes situation is kind of intriguing because we don't know, right? He had that super rookie year, and has had the injuries since then. They're going to have to make a decision soon on whether they give him the 5th year option, which I suspect they will. But yeah, and then when you look at corner, do they want an outside corner? Do they want a guy that can play in the slot? I thought that Keyshawn Nixon was probably better than people gave him credit for in the slot last year for a guy that's still learning that position. But yeah, I mean, overall, I can make a case for lots of things here, and it absolutely wouldn't surprise me at pick 25 to see the Packers trade down. Absolutely wouldn't.
And that's one of the things that I think is a concept that I feel could happen, trading down at 25, certainly to get more picks, more depth. That is a Packer thing to do. Peter, though, I'm gonna give you carte blanche here. You are now the Packers GM, and you've been told you can get whatever guy you want. Don't worry about what you would be trading away. Who would you jump to get in this year's draft if you could, regardless of what you have to trade away to get him?
If I was considering trading up with some little bit of reality to my answer, the guy I'd consider trading up for is Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. Now, he's 13 on my board, so you've got to have to get up to that kind of area, absolutely into the top 15 to get him. There are very few guys that I would give up too much to trade up for, because in the positions where the Packers have needs or they're likely to pick, I think that there's depth. And you get to this question, don't you, whether is there a great drop-off between offensive tackle 4, say, and offensive tackle 7? And there may well not be. But I like Quinion Mitchell, super smooth, very nice out of his transition. Is a little bit feisty as well, which you kind of like, has some attitude. Quinion Mitchell's the one guy I would probably consider trading up for. The guy that I like, if he's there, and that's the question. And this is the guy you may have to trade a few slots for. The guy that I would ideally like at 25 is Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. And whilst it will be interesting to see how the dynamic would work with him and Xavier McKinney, who's, you know, absolutely fantastic off-season signing at safety for the Packers. A second safety is still a position of need for the Packers, and DeJean can play safety, can play slot corner, he can play outside corner. In my view, he's one of those guys that seems to be better when he's facing the football, when he's facing the quarterback, which is why I think he projects better to safety or slot corner potentially. And he's feisty and physical as well. So I've seen some people compare him because of his size with Josh Jackson, who the Packers drafted out of Iowa 6 years ago, 2018 draft, I think it was. They're not the same player. Cooper DeJean is a lot more versatile. In my view, is a far better athlete, and he's a lot more physical than Josh Jackson was. So I like DeJean.
I like that you went to the cornerback position on your dream trade up. My guy is Terrion Arnold out of Alabama.
Yeah.
What do you like about Arnold?
Yeah, and Arnold's an interesting one. And one of the questions I always have about these guys, it's like guys from Alabama and guys from Georgia quite often. When those programs are so strong and you look at the Alabama corners and you've got two really good ones, you sometimes keep asking yourself, does one of them look good because the other one's there as well? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's something you have to keep in your mind. And I keep asking myself about the Georgia guys. You know, when Georgia's sending 3 or 4 defensive linemen and a couple of linebackers to the draft, do some of them look good because the others are so good? I don't know. Yeah, I like Arnold as well. I mean, he's only just below Quinion Mitchell on my board, so I think he has good ball skills, really good athlete, decent size, all that stuff that you would like. I slightly like Mitchell more. I think he's it's really difficult. Slightly better athlete now. You know, when you're talking about guys at that level, it's minuscule. I think that Mitchell just has that kind of attitude that I like Jair Alexander has, that you have to have in those corners. A little bit, just attitude. Let's just call it that.
You mentioned this briefly, Peter, but offensive line is absolutely a position that we're going to make multiple draft picks in. And the question is, what is going to be the availability of players at 25 versus 41 versus 58? How deep are you going to be able to go and still get somebody who's going to be a top tier offensive tackle who's going to be able to contribute? Or is this something where you really do want to get that first round pick on him?
And I'll add to that, one of the other guys I look to maybe trading up for is Amarius Mims. So overall ranking there, Peter, offensive line.
So the offensive tackle group and the offensive line group as a whole is deep in this draft. And I think it really comes back to once those top 7, let's say the top 7 is the 4 quarterbacks and the 3 wide receivers, is how quickly there is a run on offensive tackles. So Alt's going to go, Fashanu's probably going to go, but then is there a run on these guys or not? I like Amarius Mims from an athletic point of view. Now, 2 question marks from a Packers perspective. One, he's really big, right? For me, that's not a question mark. If he's big and he can play, it does, great. So much the better. But when was the last time the Packers drafted a guy that's 6'8" and 340 pounds? Right, lots of Packers tackles are typically 6'5" guys. I don't know whether that matters or not to the Packers. It may do, it may not. I think the other question, obviously, with Amarius Mims, he's only started 8 games in college. And that's the question that I can't keep going away from. It keeps coming back to me is, would I take him? Yes. But would an NFL team take a guy that's just started 8 games in college? And that I don't know. For me, is he in that kind of late teens to 25 area? Yes, absolutely. And I would have no problem taking him if he was there on the board at that time. Played right tackle at Georgia, but I also think he can play left tackle, right? So I think he gives you that option. And I think with the offensive line for the Packers, I think some of it's going to be about getting the guys in there and working out what their best position is. I've long since, and I know that it's been talked about recently in the media, but if we were to go back to the draft guide of 3-4 years ago, I've long since been a believer that Zach Tom's best position is center, right? I guess him turning out to be as good as he's been at right tackle has been a little bit of a bonus. And then you get into the question, well, do you move that guy when he's really that good? But so I think it's going to be a question of working it out a little bit as they go along. And I want to throw another name in there who was the first guy that I talked about as a potential Packer a number of months ago for this draft. And that's Graham Barton of Duke. And his profile is a little bit like Zach Tom's. So he started his career at Duke as a center. Later, second year, moved to left tackle, has started 3 years at left tackle. His arms are a little bit short for the typical left tackle profile, which is why, we're kind of projecting him to come back inside. But you would imagine that he can play center, that he can play guard, and could possibly still play tackle. So you've got this other guy, similar type profile to Zach Tom, if you like, that if you threw into the mix, it gives you the opportunity to get your 5 best linemen on the field at whatever spots they are. So I just think offensive line is a great opportunity here for the Packers, whether that's at 25, and I would go that route at 25 if Cooper DeJean was off the board. That was the route I would go. But I think there's a bunch of guys as well at 41. So the other guy that comes to my mind is Kingsley Sumatea of BYU, multiple year starter at tackle. And one of the things that I like about him, and I think that the Packers would like about him, is he started both at left tackle and right tackle. And again, that kind of throws into that versatility thing for the Packers. The other thing about those tackles, and we've seen it further down the draft with the likes of John Runyon, is you get a second shot typically with lots of tackles, that if they don't work out at tackle, you can try them inside. So yeah, at 41 for me, Kingsley Sumatea would be a nice pick. So I think there's plenty of value at that position.
And you mentioned it. It really depends on what the other teams do. If there is a run on offensive linemen, but this is a deep offensive line draft. Yeah. We have 3 picks in the first 2 rounds, 5 in the first 3. I think that Green Bay is going to find a lineman in one of those picks, but also looking at kind of the style. You mentioned Zach Tom, but also Elton Jenkins. These are guys that are versatile and can play any spot on the line. Presuming that is now the Packers' MO. Your top guy, you're thinking, is Graham Barton?
Yeah. So I guess my 2 top guys for the Packers, if they stay at 25, would be Cooper DeJean would be the first one, and the second one would be Graham Barton, and I guess the third one would then probably be Amarius Mims.
All right.
Now it's possible that they've all gone by the time the Packers pick 25, and then you definitely for me would be probably in trade down territory, but we'll see.
One of the questions I had was your top 3 guys, so I can check that one off, Peter. Good job. Let's look at the overall draft, though. Again, like I said, we have 5 picks in the first 100. And then, the Saturday picks, there's always a mishmash of what's going to happen there on Saturday. Let's look at overall positions, breaking down everything down. There are some things that we know we don't need, but other things that we need, but maybe there's nothing great at the top. Like safety, there's not really anything great at the top. Xavier McKinney is a free agent that we brought in. Same with running back. We bring in Josh Jacobs. We lose Aaron Jones, but there's a depth issue. There's a down the road issue. There's not a lot of great running backs up top. Are those 2 positions that we can see Green Bay getting in second, third round, or even on Saturday?
I think the running back position is an interesting one in this draft. As you say, there's nobody likely to go in the first round. We had the 2 guys, Bijan Robinson and Jamal Gibbs, go relatively early last year. That's not going to happen this year. But what you've got is this whole group of guys, about 8 to 10 guys, that are kind of second to fourth round area. And barring 1 or 2 of those guys, I think you can make a case for them almost going in any order, depending on the type of back that you're looking for. I think that Jonathan Brooks of Texas and Trey Benson of FSU, I think those guys are the first 2 off the board. I think that whilst I had them Brooks, then Benson, I think Benson is the one that could sneak into the first round if there was a team wanting to go for that route. But I think those 2 guys go in the second round. I think from a Packers perspective, the guy that I like is Jalen Wright out of Tennessee. So third round, fourth round, that kind of area. And partly because he looks a lot like Aaron Jones, right? And very slightly taller, but similar kind of size profile. I think it's 4.38 40. So he's very quick. And for a relatively small guy, is a good inside runner, but also can run the outside zone. Didn't catch a lot of passes until this past year, but is definitely an improving receiver. He's got more work in the receiving game, which the Packers want. So I think kind of Jalen Wright, if you're looking for an Aaron Jones replacement, if there is such a thing, kind of works for me at running back for the Packers. I know that there will be lots of Wisconsin fans wanting Braylon Allen. For me, I don't think that's a great fit for the Packers. When I see Braylon Allen, I see a slightly smaller AJ Dillon, right? So I think we've got that guy already. But given the Packers running back situation, and you're right, I know they like Emmanuel Wilson, but I would be very surprised if they don't draft one at some point.
But you're thinking what is the depth such that you could get a good value in, say, a fifth round? Certainly there have been plenty of very good fifth round backs in the NFL the last few years. I mean, is there that sort of depth that we can expect to get somebody who has a chance of being good down the road or immediately as a change of pace?
I think yes. And the reason I say that is when I looked at this running back class, so I think last year was a little bit of an exception with 2 going in the first round, but the recent running back class, this looks pretty much the same as lots of running back classes, in that there's kind of a level of depth throughout the class. I like Tyrone Tracy out of Purdue in about round 5, and part of that is the versatility. So there's a guy that played 3 years at wide receiver and 2 years at running back, so can run and catch, really good speed. 700 plus yards rushing last year, 6.3 yards per carry, etc. So the one for me in that kind of middle of day 3 area, if you like, would be Tyrone Tracy out of Purdue. There's a guy who started his career at Wisconsin, went to Louisville, Isaac Gorindo, that lots of people are starting to, he's beginning to get a little bit of traction in these last few days before the draft. So he's not on my watch list. But part of the reason for that traction is the guy is a sprinter. He ran 4.34 in the 40. Has been injured a lot of his career, but you wouldn't rule out, a pick on him in round 7 when you've got 11 picks. But Tyrone Tracy is my guy in that kind of third round.
So if I can stay in sort of mid to later round picks, obviously with the change in our defensive formation and the loss, for example, of Devondre Campbell, right? Linebacker is clearly a position we're going to make at least one, if not more than one pick, but nobody's going to do those as early picks in the draft in 2024. So what is the depth in the outside linebacker positions? And, is this something where we can get reasonable value in a 5th, 6th round, or are we going to have to grab somebody in, say, the 3rd round in order to have somebody who's going to have a chance of making a starting contribution?
Yeah, so I think this group of off-the-ball linebackers is actually somewhat similar to running backs. I think it's become almost a typical type group where there isn't anybody at first round level. I think when the Packers took Quay Walker, that surprised us all. I think for when he went in the first round, I think there's a solid group in round 2, 3, 4. Right. So my favorite player in this whole draft, not the best player, but my favorite player in this whole draft is Peyton Wilson out of North Carolina State, linebacker. Now, this is a guy that's had multiple injuries, shoulder injuries, knee injuries in his college career, but still runs a 4.43 40. So he's a supreme athlete, probably more effective against the pass than he is against the run. So he's great in pass coverage, can blitz a little bit. Isn't that kind of, I don't know who you would think of your immediate kind of thumper run stuffing linebacker, but he's not that guy. And I'm not sure there is one actually in this draft. Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M is right up there towards the top of round 2, probably somewhere, again, good against the pass. I think the Packers, I won't say have, I was about to say have to go this route. They don't have to do anything. But you, from the outside looking in, you'd think you would really need one or more of these guys. Trevin Wallace out of Kentucky, maybe end of day 2, early day 3 guy, similar type of profile in slightly, in my view, slightly better against the pass than against the run, but he's a real athlete, 4.41 40, that kind of thing, plays special teams, kind of fits that mold. Yeah, and I guess one of my other favorite players in this draft, probably more of an edge guy, but can play a little bit inside, is Jalix Hunt out of Houston Christian. So really, really small school. But yeah, another, and that's a bit of a theme here, another super athletic guy, can rush the passer, excellent on special teams, which is typically what you're looking for that far down the draft as well. So yeah, there's absolutely opportunities to get linebackers from, let's say, the middle of round 2 all the way through this draft. I think the difficulty is, as I said, I don't think there's that supreme run stuffing every down potentially linebacker on the board. I guess what remains to be seen, with this Packers 4-3 defense, is how many linebackers are really on the field, whether it's actually really a 4-2-5 or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. But like I say, I absolutely believe the Packers have to come away with, they don't have to, I've said that twice now, they don't have to, but you would like the Packers to come away with one or two of those guys.
Okay, Peter. So we've peppered you about Packers needs and things like that. So let's look at a couple other positions where on its face, the Packers seem to be in pretty good shape. Kind of these middle round picks, things like that. How about for quarterbacks or wide receivers? Is there somebody kind of day 2, day 3 that you're thinking, wow, this guy would be really, really good in green and gold?
So quarterbacks, I'm a great believer in the route that they went down in the 1990s of taking guys late in the draft, middle to late in the draft, and developing those guys. And if they never come through as your starter, and we're hoping that Jordan Love's going to be our starter for the next 35 years or however long it is, those are guys that either become really solid backups, or in 2 or 3 years' time, their value is 2 or 3 rounds higher than it was when you picked them. So we kind of went through that in the 90s with, the Mark Brunells and the Aaron Brookses and the Matt Hasselbecks and all of those guys. The guy for me, I guess, towards the end of this draft is Joe Milton out of Tennessee. Probably has the strongest arm in this draft, and that includes the likes of Caleb Williams in the top of this. And Joe Milton has a tremendous arm, and he's a really good athlete. Ran 4.4 something in the 40. Can really move. Now, clearly, going at round 6 or round 7, that kind of area, there's some areas to work on. Accuracy, touch, and all of those kinds of things. But he would be a really nice project, I think, at a position where you don't need to have, a guy that comes in and plays straight away. So that would be the guy there for me at quarterback. Wide receiver's an interesting one. We touched on this earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if they sneakily took a guy at wide receiver, relatively high, and I don't quite know what that means. Right, so I don't know whether I'm talking 2nd or 3rd or 4th round, right? Just because, not because it's a position of need, but because I think it's a position you keep retooling. I like Ricky Pearsall out of Florida in round 2-ish area. Good speed, 4.41 140, really nice hands. I like Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. Now, I don't think he's probably going to go too high for where the Packers would want to spend a pick on a wide receiver, but he's kind of in that 40 area, probably in this draft. Outstanding route runner, probably the best route runner in this draft. And then round 3-ish, wide receiver, Javon Baker out of Central Florida, a little bit bigger, 6'1.5", over 200 pounds, and a really good blocker. And I know the Packers like those blocking wide receivers. So yeah, that's quarterback and wide receiver. Did we touch on another position? Tight end.
Indeed. So, so it does segue into the position where the Packers really hit the jackpot. Expended a lot of draft capital last year. That coveted tight end position.
Because Jeff loves tight ends.
So, obviously with the 2 high picks last year, with the injuries, both getting the opportunity to show their skills. Would the Packers maybe late round, something like that? Is there a tight end that we just can't live without?
So I think the tight end position is really interesting for the Packers because, as you say, last year they did hit the jackpot with Musgrave and Kraft, and I think it's quite possible that they'll go down the H-back type route to replace Josiah DeGuara, who's moved on in free agency. They seem to like having at least one of those H-back type guy. So it's a little bit smaller, a guy that can block on the move. And for me, there's a couple of guys. There's Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State, probably 3rd round type guy, 6'3", 250, that kind of size. And then a round or so later, Jaheim Bell out of FSU, who's 6'3", 240-ish. So they're all kind of in that kind of DeGuara type size.
Let's not say that word. Those are bad words to mention in the draft. We think we might have moved beyond the 3rd round curse, I hope. And with 2 3rd round picks as of right now this year, let's hope that we do something a little bit better than that. But
I think that's probably the type of tight end, if they're going to go after one, would be the H-back type. Because I think other than that, they've got the 2 starters. They've got Ben Sims in there. I think that it's not a position of huge need, but I know that LaFleur and those guys, they seem to like having that H-back type. So that wouldn't surprise me. Let's say round 4-ish. There may be one thing just worth throwing out there, and I probably should have mentioned this closer to the start. Next year's draft is likely to have a lot more people, a lot more guys entering it than this year, because the extra COVID eligibility year starts to run out. And so the perception is that next year's draft is probably, because there's more people in it, probably a lot deeper than this year's, which means it keeps going through my mind whether part of the smart play this year is to think about trading some of this year's picks for picks next year.
Okay.
Particularly when you've got 11 picks this year.
Sure.
I don't know whether that may be a route they go down, but it certainly keeps going through my mind.
Peter, we're definitely going to talk about that 2025 draft in a minute, but let's talk about 2024. It is time to put your cards on the table. We want your top 3 choices, Pete. Who are they going to take at number 1? Who do you want them to take at number 1? And maybe just some kind of crazy wild card scenario that you think is going to happen.
I think, assuming he's on the board, I think they take Graham Barton, offensive lineman out of Duke. Who I would like them to take is Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. And I guess my scenario is probably the one that I talked about earlier, because I think it's very, very unlikely. But my unlikely scenario is that they trade up into the top 15 and get Quinion Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo.
Excellent. Not to belittle all of the work that you do, Peter, because you do a great amount of work putting your draft guide together. But the 3 of us are going to grab a hat. I have my old style hat, and we have 10 pieces of paper. We're going to throw them in the hat, and we are going to make our pick from there. Jeff, who you got?
All right, drum roll. I've got trade up for cornerback Terrion Arnold, Alabama.
So now, Jeff, do you want to keep that, or do you want to go for door number 2 and grab one of Peter's picks?
I'm going to keep it.
You're going to keep it. All right.
All right. I have got select cornerback Cooper DeJean, Iowa. So, Peter, I think you and I are in the same position.
Yep.
All right. Here we go. I have. Oh, my. It's the one I wanted. We haven't even talked about this guy, Peter. It is select cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. How can you go wrong with a name like Kool-Aid?
After we had Ha before, I mean, we've got to keep going for the cool names out of Alabama, right?
You haven't mentioned him. Tell me about Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned him. Tall corner, returns punts as well. Not quite as fast as Terrion Arnold, but I like McKinstry. And actually, although we haven't mentioned him, he wouldn't surprise me if he was the Packers pick at 25. Would not surprise me at all. So he would be like about the 4th corner on the board. 5th if you included Cooper DeJean, but I've DeJean in the safety group. But he's about the 4th corner on the board, about that area, 25 to 32, that kind of area. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think the thing we have to remember always about those guys at the SEC and Big Ten, you don't get to play at those schools unless you're good players.
And so we're kind of in consensus here. It's defensive backfield, right? Cornerback, or as you said, Cooper DeJean moving over to safety. I think we're all in consensus there, whether it's through great analysis or luck of pulling it out of the hat, right?
Which just goes to show.
that means we're picking a wide receiver for sure, right?
Exactly.
Well, we are going to be watching the draft on Thursday night. I'm going to wait to see what the pick is, and then I'm going to clip out whatever we picked right, and I'm going to make it sound like geniuses. All right. So there'll be some great editing Thursday night as well. Peter, we want to thank you for joining us on this edition of our draft preview. The question is, in 2025, do we get you live and in person in Green Bay for our draft preview?
There's a possibility. I would love to be there if everything comes together. Then, yeah,
I would say it is a moral imperative for you to be in Green Bay.
Wow, no pressure now.
We will find a place for you to stay between the 3 of us. Make sure your passport is up to date. Neil, you've got the shirt. You're excited about the draft in Green Bay next year?
I obviously am. It's a unique opportunity. I went to the draft in Nashville. I thought it was absolutely fabulous. I think it's going to be exciting to see how the city of Green Bay responds to it, what they do that's going to be different, because we don't have anything that's equivalent to Broadway. But on the other hand, the Stadium District is it's certainly capable of hosting a lot of people. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. And I think the fun element is what I'm most looking forward to. It's, as we've talked about for games before, it's the interactions with fans from other teams. It's the excitement. I mean, that's the nature of the draft, is it's all about potential and possibility. On draft day, everyone we pick is going to be a star, and it's always about happiness, right? It's, unless you're a Jets fan or an Eagles fan, but like for normal fans, draft day is all about, these guys are going to be stars for our team. I'm so happy that we have these players on our team, and to be able to do that live with crowds and crowds of Packers fans and fans of other NFL teams, I think is going to be an incredible experience.
The draft in Green Bay will definitely be exciting. I'm planning on being there as well. Like I said, we'll have the band back together here. If we all four of us will be sitting at a table having a beer discussing the 2025 draft. My hope is that the Packers will have the last pick in the first round next year. Kind of a la Kansas City, perhaps, right? Kind of following their footsteps. And as Neil said, I think with the Stadium District and kind of the uniqueness that the Green Bay is going to be able to show the world that they can handle the draft. One, hopefully, fingers crossed for good weather, not a snowstorm or something weird like that. But in terms of just sort of the bucket list for people to come to Lambeau, I think it's a great example, or it's a great opportunity for people to travel to Green Bay for that reason, to experience that, and a unique draft experience. As Peter pointed out or touched on a little bit, perhaps it'll be a much deeper draft as well. So, lots of unexpectedness, and I'm sure the Packers will come up with some memorable, or the Packers and the NFL will come up with some very memorable things to celebrate Green Bay as well. So overall, I think it's going to be fantastic. But again, first things first, this week we've got the draft in Detroit, and I think it's going to be great to follow up and see what the hat predicted, if we're right, if we're not right. And
I trust Peter's draft guide more than the hat, to be fair. But...
Absolutely. Agreed. So we'll see until next time.
And just because I've created the character on the podcast, I'm going to stick with consistency. It's going to be a fucking nightmare. But Pete, you are certainly welcome to come in and experience it. I would love to have you in the car with me so you can see firsthand just how great it's going to be. So with that, Peter, tell us again where you are. Where's the draft guide? Where are you on Twitter? Where can people find your podcast? What are you up to the rest of the year?
Thank you again for having me on. It's been absolutely fantastic. Appreciate all the kind words. Yeah, the draft guide can be found, as I said, at ukpackers.co.uk. There's a link there to the 2024 draft guide. It's available PDF for free, so just download it. It is pretty big, 310 pages. Yeah, I spend most of my time podding on a podcast called The AVG Cheese. That's AVG Cheese, and they can be found on Twitter at AVG Cheese, and they're well renowned for having a swear jar, so should be pre-warned when you listen to that pod. On occasion they do have a swear jar. All of the money goes to charity, and sometimes it's quite a lot, but it always goes to a local Wisconsin charity, so it makes it worth its while. And yeah, I also spend some time on the UK Packers podcast around this time of year, the draft period in particular. Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter, X, at @the_IT_hedgehog.
And we'll put the link on our page as well. Now, Peter, in the swear jar, when you say bloody and bollocks, do you get away with that, or do you still have to put money in?
So one of the running jokes is I very rarely swear. Right. I typically don't have that problem. But one of the amusing things, they actually have a real swear jar, so you can hear the quarters going in every time. But yeah, it's typically not me.
Now, Neil, I know you've spent the last 48 hours listening to the Tortured Poets album from Taylor Swift. You're also trolling Peter with your Arsenal jersey. What is going on, Neil?
Peter's just not mentioned anything about the other football, and I'll just note that Arsenal is top of the Premier League, and we're facing Chelsea in 2 days. So I'm looking forward to doing what we have done to many teams this season, especially mid-table teams like Chelsea.
Ooh.
Ouch.
Wow. Well, that wasn't very nice for our guest.
But not wrong, I'm afraid. Unfortunately.
Neil being cheeky and daft, if you will. All right, final thoughts on the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to go to our guest, Peter, first. What you thinking is going to happen this week, Thursday? What do you like?
Yeah, I think the Packers are in a great position because of the number of picks and because a lot of their needs, wide receiver, tight end, etc., were filled last year. So I think it's going to be really interesting from a Packers perspective because they absolutely could stand pat and get their guy. They could move up. They could trade down out of the first round. So I think it's going to be just a really interesting draft from a Packers perspective.
I think the draft, expect the unexpected. That's why they have a whole night devoted to the first round, right? This is reality TV. This is drama. We've talked about it. There's going to be runs on different positions. We could see lots of offensive quarterbacks. We could see franchises mortgaging their futures to get their guy.
Hopefully other NFC North teams doing that.
Exactly. And with the Bears picking first, are they going to screw that up somehow? Perhaps. But in general, again, expect the unexpected. We'll be watching and looking forward to an exciting weekend.
Now, this past week, I did talk to someone who works in the industry of catering. They cater food to Lambeau Field and American Family Field. And they are actually getting prepared for the NFL draft by going to Detroit this week to see how everyone in Detroit is doing it. And that's an interesting perspective. I know I harp on the infrastructure, so I hope that there are a lot of people in Green Bay who are in Detroit this week to say, this is how they're doing it, and this is what we can learn from it. Not only what goes in, but as I've said before, we got to worry about what goes out. If the Green Bay public works system can handle everything that happens with everything going out and 250,000 people next year, then I will become a believer. But like I said earlier, it could literally be a shit show next year. I hope not. I expect great things. I expect a great draft. The last two have been spectacular for Green Bay. I think that we'll do well again this year. I look forward to following Peter's draft guide while watching the draft. Neil, what do you like?
The draft is just a magical time, and I think that all the hope and possibility is what makes the draft so exciting. And I'm really looking forward to the future in that. But I'm also in Green Bay because my father is ill, and you think about your past as well at that point, and your father is the first person to throw you a football. I have gained my love of sports from him. He talked about baseball. When he was a kid, there was no team in Wisconsin. So he talked about listening to Ted Williams on the transistor radio from Boston as a kid. When the Braves moved to Milwaukee and being able to be excited by those 1950s Braves team, he snuck down from college for one of the games in the 1957 World Series. As much as anything, he taught me to hate the Yankees. And, your sports loves are important, but your sport hates are important. And I'm a Mets fan because my dad taught me to hate the Yankees. But globally, he's been so important to everything that I do. I'm a scientist, and he's the one who taught me this joy of looking at science and thinking about things from a scientific perspective. My love of the outdoors, of fishing, of hunting, of conservation. He's something that he's always been thinking about those elements of the outdoors and how to appreciate all of the elements of nature. But even more important, he's taught about kindness. He's taught me about love and about the importance of family. And there's so many elements to my personality that are directly a reflection of what he has taught me. And I'm thinking about him right now. Dad, I love you. Thank you for everything.
Neil, having grown up with you, knowing your dad, we wish him well as well. He is also taken an interest in us growing up too. Now you got me verklempt. He's taken an interest in us growing up as well, and we appreciate that. We wish you the best while you're home, and we wish your dad well.
Absolutely, Neil.
With that, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That is all one word, on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Apple Podcast, and Spotify, and on Facebook at the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. We'll get the links up for Peter, his Twitter page, and the draft guide. Peter, thank you again very much for joining us. And to everyone, may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Go Pack, go.